Thanks, Dave. I promise no more incriminating videos from our stint in the Ukraine. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank my sponsors, CSBP and Integro Private Wealth, and also Nuffield Australia for giving me the opportunity to travel the world in what was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So the focus of my Nuffield studies was digital agriculture, farming in the digital age. My farming background, as Dave mentioned, I grew up on the south coast of Western Australia, just north of Mount Barker in West Kendenup. It's a family-run operation, 50% comprised of grain production and also a heavy livestock component as well, prime lamb and beef. Traditionally, our family has been very focused on livestock production, and that's initially where I sort of got the drive to apply for a Nuffield Scholarship. A lot of our livestock production system has been heavily focused on generating efficiencies, off the back of innovative system design and engineering solutions, largely driven by my father, who's here today. But beyond that, I got to wondering, where's this next lift in productivity going to come from? And increasingly, it's sort of becoming apparent that, digital agriculture is going to play a major part in driving productivity moving forward. So the initial sort of leg of my studies or my travel took me to the East Coast, where I looked at a lot of the Agtech that was beginning to emerge. The virtual fencing and the number of animal wearables that are coming onto the market, and I quickly began to realise that there's some real fundamental issues with where the Agtech sector is heading, and their disconnect with what we as producers are really after as credible on-farm solutions. So I guess the focus of my topic really sort of changed and morphed into more, looking at digital agriculture as a more broader subject, and really trying to identify, why do we need to, as an industry, head down this pathway? Is there a growing investment in Agtech globally? Is there an appetite for Agtech? What are farmers seeing, globally? What issues are they encountering with their adoption and use of Agtech on farm? I touched a little bit on data as well. Tom focused quite heavily on data in his presentation, and that's something that we really need to address as an industry. And also, looking at where the opportunities are going to come from, trying to really pinpoint, where those opportunities are for the industry. So, look at the need to go down that digitisation pathway. A report by the McKinsey Global Institute identified a strong link between increasing industry digitisation and an increase in productivity growth. Industries such as the media, finance, information and communication technology, they're ranked as the most digitised industries and seeing significant productivity growth rates, far and above the less digitised industries. The same report identified agriculture as the least digitised industry, and globally productivity is growing at around -1%. Looking closer to home, our productivity has been quite stagnant over the last 2 decades. Over the last 20 years, we're seeing productivity growth of around 1%. And we've got some pretty lofty targets that have been put out there by industry, NFF, and taken up by the federal government as well to grow GVP up to $100 billion by 2030. And on that sort of current, that current trajectory, we're not going to reach it unless there's another revolution in our production systems. Similar to what we saw with the mechanisation of agriculture and the Green Revolution through the 60s. So, growing investment, there's definitely an appetite for investment in this space. In 2012, the global investment in agri-food tech was sitting at around $2.2 billion. In 2018, that's risen to $16.9 billion invested globally. Predominantly, that's looking at sort of consumer-facing technologies. So, changing consumer buying, the consumer experience with food, alternate food production systems, those sorts of things. But there's definitely a growing investment in stuff that relates to on-farm production as well. Interestingly, from you can see in the table here that the real engine room for investment is the US, and particularly California. There's a very strong investment culture there, looking at disruptive technologies. And I guess concerningly for us in Australia, our investment is in Agtech or agri-food tech is significantly falling behind. Per capita, we're around $1.20. Contrast that to the US at $24, in California at $100. We're in a country where agriculture makes up a far greater contribution to GDP. A lot of that investment in the US is starting to look at consolidation, so aligning of farm management programs with the major agri-chemical companies who are sort of looking for data to improve their product development. Investment in Australia is highly sort of influenced by government investment. We have not so much of a private sector approach as the US does, and we have a very active sort of scene in accelerator programs and getting innovations through to products, but not so much that private sector, that investment that we need to take those products through to full commercialisation. Some of the other regions, looking at the UK, I visited two institutions, Agrimetrics and Agri Epicenter, which are two of four government initiatives looking at growing digital agtech and adoption on farm. Agrimetrics is looking at using historical data and trying to generate insight, for farmers. In total, those four initiatives have attracted £80 million pounds of investment from government, matched by £80 million pounds from industry. The Internet of Farming and Food 2020 is another initiative in the EU, which has attracted €34 million of investment, with the same sort of goal, looking to accelerate technology adoption on farm. And with a sort of general drive towards improving the productivity of agriculture in the EU. So what are some of the issues that are common around the world with agtech and its adoption? And it's probably nothing dissimilar to what we experience here, but a great quote from a meeting I had with Danny Kleinfelter at Texas A&M was that a lot of technology currently isn't necessarily making businesses more profitable, but it is potentially making farming easier. I think fundamentally a lot of the technology that's available has a very marginal return on investment. There's a lot of hype generated around new technology, which is far removed from the reality of what it offers on farm. Tech fatigue, the value of data isn't being realised, and we're really lacking real decision support tools. A few farmers that I met on my travels, Aaron Gingrich in Illinois, he's sort of at that point where he's starting to really see a lot of tech fatigue on his farm. He's heavily invested in new technology, but he's not necessarily seeing the return. And his sort of strategy is around data collection and looking for opportunities moving forward in the sort of the marketing space. But he's employed someone full time in his operation just to manage his data and his flow of data between his different management platforms. Looking at the marginal return on investment, I had a great meeting with Michael Horsch in Germany. He's part of an invite-only benchmarking group made up of the top 100 of the top arable businesses in Germany. And his comment to me around tech adoption was that invariably the best performing businesses weren't the early adopters of technology, and the ones that were sort of looking to adopt and implement new technology, they were sort of sitting around the average. It sort of really goes to highlight that there's not really a real financial sort of incentive to adopt in this new technology. So a few comments around data and trust. There's a lot of concerns and growing concerns around data sharing and potential potential use of data to manipulate markets and this is not entirely unfounded. We've sort of seen what's happened with Facebook in the last few years and how they were using social media data. And back in WA, we had quite a backlash from growers around CBH's push to bring in more paddock planting data from our grain growers, and farmers believe that they should be paid for their data. And in a sense, we do need to derive value from our data, but the only way that we can really derive that value is if we have more of a strategy around how we're using our data. This farmer I met, Tom Allison, fundamentally there's a real lack of thought around how data is being used. There's not enough industry involvement in really setting a strategy moving forward for how we're using that data. Standardisation and quality of data is questionable. We're looking at what agrimetrics we're doing. A comment made to me by another farmer, James Price, was that a lot of the data that they're trying to use, the historical data, is probably lacking in its quality and its authenticity. And the insights that they're looking to generate potentially might not have much use. So looking at the on-farm potential of digital agriculture, moving forward, we really need to push past this. Looking at single point solution type technology and have a whole of farm integrated approach. And we won't see any real significant gains in productivity without this integration. So the next step for agriculture, as identified by the Australian Farm Institute, was in decision agriculture. So, informed practice change, on farm, which is informed by, the analysis of data collected via digital means on farm. A speaker earlier mentioned the potential for productivity growth is around 25%. And the major drivers of this growth are going to be around variable rate, the extension of variable rate technologies, better input management, process automation, which Boyd was talking about, very, very applicable for the grains sector, and better breeding, genetic and rotation decisions. I guess one of the big points which I think is has real potential aside from that on-farm productivity is around marketing, and that was probably one of the more common themes that I experienced during a lot of my meetings. The real value in heading down this pathway is linking our data directly to the consumer and being able to leverage a premium for it. So whether that's prove traceability, prove a legitimate sustainable practice, I think that's the direction we're heading down. And that was expressed to me by Michael Horsch and a number of other people that I interviewed. And that premium might be paid for based upon our carbon footprint, our water use efficiency, or our animal husbandry practices. But really, as an industry, we're probably not ready for that. This sort of approach requires complete transparency and trust. Another comment from Michael was that there's no point in tracing a story that's bad, and I think particularly in our livestock industries we've got a long way to go before we're ready to be that fully transparent with consumers if we're looking to drive derive those benefits that the marketing has to offer. You can't go out and tell half the story, because one of the farms that we visited in Oregon as part of our GFP, Tillamook, they had a great story. We visited their interactive centre, and they were telling this great story about dairy, and we've noticed just recently in the media that they've had a lot of negative media publicity because what the story that they were telling wasn't actually the reality. They were telling a story around pasture-raised, dairy production, but the reality was that it was predominantly barn systems. So, we really need to be telling a story, and really we need to build that trust with the consumer. So, looking at grower recommendations, I think it's important to realise that the Agtech industry is in the very early stages. A meeting I had with Lane Arthur, who's head of digital solutions at John Deere, he sort of likened the current sort of space that we are at in agriculture to the early operating system wars. So, there's a lot of jostling for positions still to come. There's going to be a lot of consolidation among the providers of Agtech moving forward. But as a farmer, we really need to identify what our need is as a producer. Look for solutions that have a real return on investment and a real fit in your operating system. Providers aren't offering enough integration, so it's imperative for us to look for solutions that have integrations. Move towards transparent farming practices if you want to take advantage of those marketing opportunities. And think about as an industry how we're organising and protecting data. Some great examples I saw in the US was the Grower Information Services Cooperative, looking at aggregating and storing farmers' data so that we can potentially start using it to generate better insight. So as an industry, I think it is incumbent on our peak bodies to look at how setting a data strategy. And I noticed in the last few weeks there's been some announcements on this. Connectivity is a concern all around the world, and we really need to address this because most of the solutions that are available are digitally enabled. They need connectivity, so we really need to start looking at that. Promote demonstration farms. There's something they're doing really well in the UK and the EU. Somewhere where new innovations have a place to go and develop and work alongside other solutions, and start being a part of that broader digital ecosystem. And capacity building. We heard it earlier today around education. We need more skills in the industry to help us transition down this pathway. So what are we doing on farm? Currently we're addressing on-farm connectivity. We're partnering with Pivotal to install a cross-farm Wi-Fi setup. We're working with providers to develop and trial new Agtech. And for me, moving forward, I really want to look at how we're managing data and develop a data management strategy and look for new marketing opportunities. So before I finish, I'd just like to give a big thank you to my parents who have travelled here today from Western Australia, and also everyone back on the farm who's sort of really taken things on their shoulders and ensure that everything's run smoothly whilst I've been away. Thank you.